Hello and welcome back. Sean here, Mountains Garage, back on my 64 Dodge Dart GT LS Turbo project. Picking away at things, I dragged in the hood, as you can see in the cover photo. Everything clears. It's always a concern when you're eyeballing turbo stuff, trying to make everything fit. Ultimately, it fits under your stock flat hood without having a hole or a bulge or in the hood, and so that looks like that's going to be the case. And that crossover exhaust pipe is further away than I thought, so by the time I heat shield it and wrap it, it'll probably be okay, or it'll melt the hood. One or the other is going to happen. I dragged in the new fiberglass hood that came with the Dart when I got it last summer in trade. I'll be glad not to have to handle that cast iron hood on the roof there. I'll have to find a safe place outside, or maybe I can find somebody with a 64 Dodge Dart that would love a hood, but there's not that many of them out there. So anyway, the turbo stuff all fits under the hood. They give you a pretty generous lip that I need to grind down to make it, the fit better. And of course I'm going to Zeus fasten it on because it's lightweight, but plenty high, but they give you lots of room to work. So that'll be interesting, but I was glad I can push down in the middle and my throttle body is not hitting on my elbow and none of the other pipes. So I'm going to call that whole turbo installation a success. It'll look relatively stock. In the buckets of parts that came with it, I believe I have all the headlight stuff, which is good. I think I have all the wiper linkage and arms. I know the motor goes under the dash by doing a little research. However, finding any information on this car is somewhat difficult. And this car is exactly the perfect mirror image of my life. Well, one, I didn't choose this car. I never intended to have a 64 Dodge Dart. That just kind of happened. However, if I get a model of something, it's always the odd one. 63 to 66 A bodies were narrower in the front. You can see the fight I've gone through making the turbo piping and stuff fit there because the front end's narrow. You can't buy like a K member and stuff for it. I think I found disc brakes for it. But 67 and up, you can buy a whole car. I'd love to have a 68 Dart, or 67 to 69 probably. I don't know if they got ugly in 70 or 71, but they changed them anyway. But I like the looks of the Hurst Hemi Darts. That's cool. So while I can't find any useful information, I do find useless information. Well, depends on how you look at it. Did you know that this feature here, that forward-facing piece of the B-pillar, is called the Hofmeister kink, named after Wilhelm Hofmeister, a BMW engineer in the 50s. So if you have any vehicle with this, an automotive engineer or designer would tell you that's the Hofmeister kink. I did manage to get the wastegate tacked on. I've got it tacked on the top here. Well, it's half welded actually. I still need to bore that hole into the adapter. I actually set it down so I'm getting more of the transition and it made it fit better. I did bore the hole in the downpipe and got that a little more than half welded, so I can finish welding that, separate the wastegate. When I take it all apart to clean and wrap all that, but touch up a few welds on that pipe. But basically the cold and hot side is done. So today, before I end up ripping this all apart, I was going to work on the coolant hoses to see if I can do it with regular hoses, which would be okay for this car, I guess. Or whether I'm going to weld AN fittings and make lines that way, which is a safer option, but we'll see. One more turbo item on the list is I want to make some sort of bracket over to the cylinder head. Of course, I'm going to cap that freeze plug so I can maybe make that bracket up a little higher and run something over. I don't want it to be in the way or be a pain to work around. However, I want to support the turbo a little more than just all the pipes do. It never hurts. So I went out to the outside speed shop and dragged in a pile of raw material to see what my imagination can come up with. So I cut up a bunch of perfectly good hose, and I did manage to connect the upper radiator hose, but I don't like it. It's really sharp, the bends, and I had to connect it with a piece of tubing, and that made the old brain kick in. If I have to connect hoses with tubing, why not make it worthwhile? I had a piece of 1.5" J-bend. Actually, I had 2 of them, just exhaust tubing. It's like 0.68, maybe a little thicker. I'll actually measure it. It's pretty rugged stuff. Ideally, this would be aluminum, but I don't have any. Reality is when I paint this inside and out, and I'm going to be running coolant or some kind of anti-rust in the coolant system, this will probably last 50 years. And it's definitely thicker than a freeze plug or something similar to that. The middle piece was some straight aluminized I had, so it'll be fine. So this is a lower. I was able to put a bead on either end where the hoses are going to connect to the radiator and to the water pump. And that came out fantastic. I'll show you the bead roller my brother made. He was smart enough to make the male die small enough to go inside probably something half that size. I think it'll do 3/4. I didn't measure it, but wicked handy. So this is definitely the way to go. It made life a lot easier. I only had the 2 1.5" J-bends, but I have enough left, I think. I'll be able to do the top. So I'm gonna stick this back on, give you a look at it, and then we'll work up top. Doing the same thing, and if I can make this work up top, I'll be able to make a 1/8 bung and weld it in there, and I'll be able to vent the cylinder heads, the steam ports, into this. That has to go to a high point to let the air out of the engine, because in an LS motor, the water goes in and out of the block. It doesn't exit through the intake manifold. There's nothing high enough to get the air out, so that's what those steam ports on an LS are for. Not necessarily steam, just to let bubbles and air out up to the highest point. On a, like for instance, an LS truck, they hook to the radiator. There's a hose that comes up, hooks to the radiator. So in my case, it'll hook here. Oftentimes I put a fitting on top of the water pump. That works fine too. Also, if you remember, the lower connection on the radiator was really long, twice as long as it needed to be, so I had to lop it off. I have to put a bead back on it. You can't just clamp a hose over a smooth piece of tubing and expect it not to come flying back off under pressure. I'm going to hold the radiator, have somebody hold it for me while I crank the bead roll, and I'll probably bead roll the entire radiator. I have to spin the whole thing around. But you can do pretty well with a set of non-insulated crimpers. You can go all the way around that, and that works pretty good too. So I could actually do the radiator almost in place if I had room. But also sizes. Old cars and stuff used to have like 1 3/4 lower hoses. Some still do. Modern stuff, in this case, for instance, the radiator is 1.5" top and bottom. My fitting on the water pump, I bought a swivel water neck for the LS water pump. That's 1.5", so that's a piece of cake. My water pump is actually 1 3/8" on an LS. It's pretty small. So while I make this out of 1.5", I think I have a piece of rubber that's neck down in my collection of hose junk that I'll use on the water pump end to reduce that, so I'm not trying to clamp a hose that's too big. Because the last thing you want is your coolant hoses flying off. I like the way the bottom coolant tube and hose connections turned out. Nice and gentle down off the water pump. Plenty of room for the balancer. Yes, the brake line doesn't belong there. It's just been in the way the entire time. I still have to flare or bead roll this, like I said, but that all fits good, doesn't hit the frame. Dodge, very progressive in 1964, provided me a threaded hole right here, knowing that 58 years later I'd be LS swapping it. All my hose connections will get a T-bolt style clamp, not the worm style that you typically see. They use the T-bolt style on big trucks. For the upper connection, this would work with a little bit more engineering. However, it's not ideal. With the 1.5-inch exhaust tubing, I was not able to make a suitable swing because there's a nipple sticking out of either one. So you have to have room for a connector hose and still make the turn. I believe the solution will be a molded hose. So I need to do a little research and come up with one that's 5.5 on center between the nipples, the center of the nipples. And it's 1.5 inches on the radiator, 1 3/8 down there. So I will let you know if I'm able to find something, or there's always plan B. But like every other piece on the car, or any car, until I'm satisfied I've done the best I could and it's probably not gonna blow apart and cause trouble, I'll keep looking for a solution that I'm happy with. This is the bead roller that my brother made. It's human powered and has a nice small male die, so pretty slick. Does a great job. I just walked up to the mailbox and I had some fittings for the Holley rails. That's -8 ORB O-ring base. I had a -6 crossover. And I'm just disregard the color of the fittings. I'm just making sure that they were going to clear everything and make the trip where they need to go. So I'm going to feed and return through here. It's the coolest, safest place I can find. Too hot up this end. And I'll either cross over probably underneath like that. So that's the plan. Basically you feed the rail full pressure and you regulate coming out of the rail and then return. And I'll mount the regulator over here. I think I actually have 2 or 3 regulators to choose from that I've collected. So that's cool. You can probably gather by the way I'm dressed, it's cold out in Maine today. I believe it was -14 degrees Fahrenheit last night and a high of about +14 right now. It's 50 degrees inside my shop. That's all I heat it to. And it's perfect working weather with my crappy old coat. I wouldn't be able to work with the multiple sweatshirts on, but I had to go outside several times to get some exhaust tubing and then up to the mailbox when the mail lady came. So where do we go now on the Dart? Well, it wouldn't make a lot of sense. Part of me wants to pull the powertrain out, rebuild the engine, fix everything under the hood, put that all back in. But the rest of the car from the firewall back needs work. I need a roll cage and I need to fix the rear suspension. I can't have the car listing 1 inch to the left from the driver's seat and the pinion angle's pointing toward the floor. I'm pretty sure I'm gonna put a 9-inch Ford in it anyway, so that all needs to be fixed. And I have a couple main hoops and a whole bunch of tubing. I'm gonna put whatever I have for roll cage in it. Try not to spend too much money, but we know how that goes. But it needs an 8-point cage, an 850 cert cage to tie it all together. I got to get rid of those ugly frame connectors and tie all that in together. And I'm gonna go about that with probably not much of a plan. I have a bender, I have some tubing, I have some miscellaneous bends, and we're gonna make something. So that's probably where we're headed next. I almost don't want to stop on it, but I do have a lot of other projects to do, so I guess I'll go inside, put my feet up, and have a think, as they say. But I hope you have had a great day. It's midweek. I guess it's Thursday, yeah. And big snowstorm coming here in Maine or in the Northeast, so we'll ride that out. Just another day. It's what we do up here. Haven't swatted a bug all day. Have a great one. Talk to you in a few days.